conflicting health advice out there, perhaps the key to feeling and performing your best is far simpler than you think. Our guest this week is breaking down the 4 essential components of health, 2 of which you probably haven't given much consideration, yet they can have the largest impact. In addition to his 4 pillars of health, we also touch on the current state of health in America, the biodynamic living, understanding the root behind particular symptoms, and some common quick fix traps. Our guest this week is Eugene Trufkin. He's a root cause health advocate with 20 years of experience in drug-free approaches to metabolic and hormonal health, lifestyle disorders, biodynamic farming, organic nutrition, and fat loss. If you want to connect with Eugene, you can grab his book, The Anti-Factory Farm Shopping Guide, or work with him directly on his website at Trufkin, Trufkin, athletics.com. If you're a bit skeptical whether this approach can actually work, I suggest you visit his website and just scroll through some of those transformations, because those speak for themselves. And before going on to some of the fancy and sometimes efficacious biohacks, start with the low-hanging fruit, his 4 pillars of health. And if you layer on anything on top of that, you'll surely get better results. To find a link to his website and everything else we discuss, go to the show notes for this episode, which will be at mindbodypeak.com/202. If you find the information we discussed helpful or any of the previous episodes, it makes a huge difference if you take just a moment and go to wherever you downloaded the episode and leave an honest review. Let people know what you think of the show and the content I bring you, because that's how I continue to find thought-provoking guests and how I bring you the best, most out-of-the-box interviews possible. It just takes a second, whether you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or any of the other platforms. With that out of the way, sit back, relax, and enjoy this conversation with Eugene Trufkin.
Eugene, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Nick, how are you doing, man? I know we keep in touch, but it's been kind of a long time since I've actually seen you.
Yes.
Since we've taken the IMS 2 course.
Yes.
I think in Austin, like 2 years ago or 3 years ago at this point.
Yeah, it was actually 4 years ago. I think it was in 2021, very long time ago. Met you in person, and then we reconnected, crossed paths again virtually. Great to have you on the show today. Let's start with the unusual non-negotiables you've done for your health, your performance, and your bioharmony.
Oh, non-negotiables. Okay. So these kind of go into, I guess, like core values. So just for the listeners, I don't know which direction this podcast was going to go, so it's kind of going in this direction here. But yeah, I guess it all goes back to being very clear on your core values. And luckily, I was actually like pretty clear on them early on. I know a lot of people kind of go on a journey of like, discovering their likes and dislikes. And oftentimes, the only way to know what you like is to first do things you don't like, be conscious of the fact that you don't like it, and then allow that to narrow down your choices in the future to things you do like to do and stuff of that sort. So for me, just kind of working out or eating healthy, et cetera, were really core priorities from early on in my life. So I was initially raised by my grandmother off-grid in Ukraine. And then I learned a lot about biodynamic farming through her and just living in tandem with nature, et cetera, And then my dad got me into into the gym with him already at like 10. So I was already lifting weights and working out with him. He was also like very health conscious as well. And my mom would always cook, whole food meals. Fast food was never like a part of my life or anything of that sort. And, like for the longest time, I've been in coaching like you. I've been doing it for like 20 years now. But it was never actually going to be my profession. In the beginning, I was just going to like join the military. And my goal initially in high school was to go to West Point. But at the time, I just had my green card. And that didn't qualify me for the officer program. So you needed like to be a full citizen at that point. Then I'm like, okay, well, I'll join. Then the next step was to join the Marine Corps as an enlisted. And as an enlisted person. And they were allowing that at that time. I don't know the rules now, but you can join as an enlisted and then gain your citizenship at a faster rate then. And I had a slip and fall accident. I just kind of slipped on some wet concrete and hit my back on a curb, so that kind of derailed that. And then I went to UCI. So as a fallback plan, I went to college. And it was just right across the street from my high school too. So I went to University High School in Irvine, and then I went to UCI. It was literally 2 blocks down the street, University of California, Irvine. And there I was just gonna get into corporate work and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Or get my initial goal was to then go get a master's in industrial psychology and then get into HR or stuff of that sort. And I was coaching people through college. I started at 19. How I started was I was at 24-hour fitness one day, and the manager came up to me and he's like, "Hey man, you checked in last year like 420 times or some crazy number, like more times than there are days. And we're looking for more trainers because we're short on trainers. So we'll pay for your certification course and you could just do this part-time, And so I did that, and I started coaching people just very part-time through college, like 10 hours a week, like 15 hours max. And towards the end of college, I was graduating. It was like 2009, I think. Obviously, that it was at the tail end of that huge mortgage collapse, and pretty much the economy was in like shambles, and everyone was losing their job. And I had a kind of dilemma. It was get into corporate work, which I already knew was kind of like very unsustainable environment, and it wouldn't give me the time that I needed to sleep well, get all my workouts in, get my meals in, plus have enough time for creative work, continued education, taking midday naps, et cetera, et cetera. And I already had a good business going too. I had a lot of great successful clients, and from them, a lot of times I learned through them what, living unsustainable life patterns for like 20, 30, 40 years will do to you. You know what I mean? And yeah, especially on LinkedIn, that's like one of my least favorite sites. You see, everyone with a happy face and their resume and stuff of that sort. And no absolutes, of course. Maybe 1 out of 1,000 actually is. But then, you meet these people in real life and they're oftentimes like very burned out, exhausted. On their resumes, instead of maybe to be more honest, instead of saying like, oh, 20 years on this or this degree in this, it should say like how many medications they're on, or the number of divorces they're in already, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, well, shit, and I felt like very kind of at a crossroads, because I told my friends that, hey, I'm just going to work 2 to 3 days a week and do my own thing. You know what I mean? And that was like crazy, especially in America, to tell people you're going to only work 2 or 3 days a week. That's like you're a crazy person. You're not thinking mentally well. But it's also important to remember that for 99% of human existence, no one had a full-time job. Everyone was a hunter-gatherer and just lived a very balanced and kind of sustainable life there. So the whole concept of like working super crazy hours, like 40, 50, 60 hours a week, it's a new concept. And
I think there's a misconception there that like when humans were hunter-gatherers, they were spending their entire day laboring, hunting, and gathering. But when you actually look at the lifestyle back then, it was a very small amount of time spent doing those activities, and the vast majority of the day was spent relaxing and unwinding and playing and having fun.
Yeah, like basically what people do on their 1 week or 2 week vacation now is pretty much what the hunter-gatherers did like 99% of their life and existence. And on top of that, only ate like wild game, wild fish.
Because hunting specifically, it would only be a couple hours every day, right?
Yeah, and sometimes like even in colder climates, I mean, you might even have to do a hunt once every few weeks, and that'll be more than enough to last you for quite a long time. Yeah, but the point is most people's central nervous systems can't work those crazy hours, especially if you combine with not doing what you like, plus the office politics that goes with it, and the different personalities that you have to constantly adjust for. All these little things kind of drain a lot of energy and put a lot of put a lot of pressure on the central nervous system, and most people's central nervous systems can't handle it. I know it kind of sounds crazy, but just look at the numbers. We have like 9 out of 10 Americans right now that are metabolically sick. Most have been on some type of medical drug or on some type of medical drug.
I was looking at those stats just the other day, and the most recent census, like 2022, I think it was, there was, I want to say 6.7 billion prescriptions in that year alone, which averages out to about 20 prescriptions per adult per year.
Yeah, I didn't know that stat, but I mean, I wouldn't even be surprised if that was the case. And the sad part is again, like American culture has normalized like mental and physical pathology. So a lot of people don't even see anything wrong with that whatsoever. You know what I mean? And although it's common, just because it is so common doesn't mean it's right. And I mean, you don't need any study or consensus. Just literally go outside like anywhere in America, and 9 out of 10 people you run into are full of obesity, misery, and disease. I mean, most people, they got to down like a half a bottle of antidepressants and like 2 cups of coffee first thing in the morning just to have enough energy to do the dishes and get to work, So these are all indications that maladaptive behavior is forming due to the central nervous system not being able to survive appropriately in the external world, which is its only role. That's its only task, and when it's not able to do that is in scenarios where there's like a tremendous amount of micro stressors and macro stressors combined, which is basically the average daily living experience of most people, I would say, in America,
Eugene, now walk me through your big 4, the things that you focus on with most of your clients, because it really brings some simplicity to the world of health. And if people are wondering whether or not it works, they can just check out your website and see all the before after transformations of what really honing those 4 things and putting those at the top can do.
So yeah, these 4 pillars, there are some supplementary ones. I mean, these are the big players. And I know a lot of people are going to hear them and they're like, oh, they're so easy to understand. I know they're easy to understand, but the question is, are you doing them? And I would say 99% of people are not honestly doing them or mastering them to any significant amount of level or anything of that sort. So the first one is, using movement as medicine. You know what I mean? And what that means to you is going to vary from person to person depending on their goals and objectives. If a person wants to train for aesthetics, they need to be kind of ideally like lifting weights like 4 to 5 days a week. If they want to be training for mountain climbing, they need to be maybe doing some weightlifting too, but a lot of, strength endurance or just endurance work or technique work as well. Stuff of that sort, but something that basically gets your body moving 4 to 5 days a week minimum with pretty good intensity, at least half of the workouts as well. And I know a lot of people are like, oh yeah, I've heard that. I know that. Yeah, I know you know that, but I guarantee you're not doing that, or if you are doing that, you're doing it incorrectly with poor technique, poor program design, not enough recovery to incentivize biological adaptation. So your tissue just breaks down over time. You have back injuries or joint injuries of various sorts, et cetera, et cetera.
What's also important about that is that you mentioned values at the very beginning of this, and that's key because you might look at the research and be like, okay, I need to do this type of training. I need to do this type of training. I need to do VO2 max. I need to do lactic acid tolerance. I need to do sprinting. I need to do all these different things. But if everything feels like a chore over the long term, which is what really matters for most metrics, it's much less likely to persist. But if you have your values, your goals, where you want to go, the things that you enjoy doing, movement really does become a medicine, and you don't have to fight every single time and deplete willpower just to follow what you want to do.
Yeah, that's true. And that kind of leans back to being crystal clear on your core values, So a lot of people do go to the gym and train for aesthetics. I actually happen to love it just unconditionally. It's one of those things that I never had to motivate myself to do. But it's not for most people, especially the lifestyle of being regimented with your eating, probably not being that social, if you really want to be on point with your aesthetics and visual appearance, because you need to be good with your sleeping patterns. You can't be out drinking, eating out, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not for everyone. But a lot of people do train for that, and obviously it's not going to be fun, especially when most people don't even know how to train for aesthetics properly. So the results aren't even there. I mean, go to any gym and pretty much everyone looks the same year after year after year. although they're there like 5 or 6 days a week, just like you, probably even for longer periods of time, you know? So yeah, I mean, it's important to pick something that's conducive to your goals and core values, presuming you're clear on them. Most people are not even clear at that level. So obviously, if you're not clear at that level, it's going to be, unless it's like dumb luck, that happens sometimes, it's going to be really tough to find the right tools to get the job done for yourself long term. But yeah, the next step, I mean, using movement as medicine is one. The next one, medical drug I use, quote unquote medical drug, is using, I just rely on like biodynamic or at least USDA organic certified food or above. You know, so this is huge because in a way, everything about you is made out of food. So look, like your dad's semen and your mom's eggs required food to form, you know, then for your mom to, you know, raise you for 9 to 12 months or whatever inside of her, that required a continuous amount of food that in a sense built your tissue. And then you're raised and now you're growing up into an adult. It requires food to sustain that, et cetera, et cetera. And then eventually you end up dying and going back into the soil, and then you become food for bugs and other animals, which then in turn become food for another person or another animal that forms the sperm and egg and then forms another baby, et cetera, et cetera. So obviously, if the quality of food is poor, you will have aesthetic challenges, you will have health challenges, et cetera, et cetera. And I know a lot of people, again, they're like, oh, I eat healthy. I hear this so often. And I'm like, oh, what does healthy even mean to you? Just ask them this question. They'll typically say like, I do keto or fasting, or I eat less, you know what I mean? Or something like this. So these are all indications that a person that doesn't know even what healthy eating is. And there's also, you know, so much greenwashing, even when a person's intention is to source high quality food, it's oftentimes difficult to understand like what all these labels mean, et cetera, et cetera. And I've taken many registered dietitians out and medical doctors out for grocery store tours when I was writing my second book at Whole Foods. And even they had a lot of confusion about what all these labels mean. And they're actual health professionals, you know what I mean? Especially the registered dietitians. I mean, their emphasis is on nutrition. And even they didn't really know the difference between, you know, cage-free, free-range, pasture-raised, USDA organic, non-GMO, humanely raised, glyphosate-free, and like the billion of other stamps you can see, paleo approved, whatever.
Eugene, we're definitely going to circle back there because I was actually going to bring that up specifically when you're talking about healthy eating. Oh yeah, I'm eating cage-free eggs. It sounds great, sounds healthy. But when revisit this conversation, we'll talk a lot more about how cage-free isn't nearly enough and it's not as healthy as it seems, and there's much better options. So we're going to revisit your book and your research and everything you've done in the world of nutrition. Let's cover the other of the 4 pillars first, though.
The third one is central nervous system management. So teaching people how to sleep properly, you know, sleep ideally between like 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., maybe take midday naps would be very beneficial for most people. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, you know, midday naps, that's fairyland. Well, then don't complain about, you know, being chronically tired, looking 10 years older than you actually are, et cetera, et cetera. These are the things that have to be done because your biology, especially the central nervous system, it really hasn't even changed for 200,000 years. So the rules are all the same. You basically, in short, have to live like a human being. And if you don't, there are going to be consequences that you pay, you know, aesthetic and metabolic issues or hormonal issues, et cetera, et cetera. That's not aging or that's not normal. Again, it's common in today's culture, but it's not normal at all. You know, like even in the health field, I mean, how many health professionals do you see have myriad of health issues themselves, you know? And supposedly they've devoted their whole life to learning how to stay healthy, and yet they can't do it, you know, because they're losing the fundamental principle of living like a human being. And it's really just these 4 principles that we mentioned, but mastering them honestly, like 7 days a week, all year round. And then the 4th one is just being like crystal clear on your core values and who you are, and then getting your actual week to look like that. So if you like to draw art or be an artist and you're in the legal field, there's a huge story gap there, you know? And the bigger the story gap, the more micro stressors that are going to be on the central nervous system. And thus, the more maladaptive behavior there has to form to deal with that. Maybe not in the initial phase of your career, like 1 or 2 years in, but after that, you will see, because on the back of your head, you know you're being fake to yourself. And that's it. There's no running from that. You can't run from yourself. Wherever you go, there you are. So unless that story gap is closed, I've just seen people just have to form maladaptive behavior over and over and over again. And instead of closing that story gap, they try to do some biohacking, or they try to do some psychotherapy, or they try to go sign up for their local CrossFit class. I'm like, dude, like just close the story gap, and you won't stop, and you'll stop the stress eating. A lot of times it's like socially acceptable activities too, like being a workaholic. A lot of people use that to, disconnect and kind of dissociate from a life they don't want, because the work keeps you busy, and it's also reinforced by Western society, and stuff of that sort. And then there are socially unacceptable maladaptive behaviors like doing drugs or promiscuous sex, cheating on your partner, et cetera, So it has many faces, but the end result is it's kind of like it deteriorates the biology at the end of the day, no matter which direction you take. And it always comes back to you. Maybe not in the beginning, but eventually you'll have to face the reality of the situation. And usually, like Paul Chek always says, it's until a life emergency happens, like a divorce or bankruptcy, or now you have cancer, or like a heart attack, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the 4 big ones. There are a lot of like little supplementary things people can do, but I mean, if you generally master those 4, you'll be at like the top 1% of the US population health-wise these days. And I don't know what else to say, man. It's like, it's really just that straightforward at the end of the day.
There's also ways you can step in that direction without necessarily having to, in the immediate short term, totally revamp your life, such as if you can't take a midday nap, then to at least make sure you're getting a full night of sleep, ample sleep, so that you wake up feeling refreshed, recovered. If you use a wearable, you see that you actually have good scores. Like if you're not able to get a nap, at least that is better than nothing, better than shortchanging your sleep and just fueling up on more caffeine and other stimulants just to get through the day. And then with the central nervous system side, you can add in practices in the short term. But if you're living like a fragmented story where you're doing one thing that you hate just to make ends meet, but then you're also knowing what you want to do and you're not doing it in any form, perhaps in the short term, you can add some more of that into your lifestyle, your routine, and eventually over time pivot. Because a lot of times it's scary just to drop whatever it is that is putting food on the table and then pivot completely without having like a clear path in mind.
It's exactly what you said. And I got this from Joel Salatin. If you can't, just because you want to solve a problem doesn't mean you have to solve the whole problem right off the bat. You can start with solving certain parts of the problem, and then, you can figure out how to solve the problem as a whole, like later on. You don't need to like solve it all at once. But the big issue too, Nick, is at the end of the day, there's like, it's tough to solve a problem with the belief system that led to the problem. This is where people go wrong all the time. I've done it myself many times in many, maybe not in my fitness goals, but in other aspects of my life. And that's what a lot of times people try to do. There's something in their belief system that led to that problem. And they're trying to use that same belief system to solve that problem. And there are no absolutes, of course. You'll find some rare exceptions, but most of the time that never works, And a lot of times, I know we're both coaches, and I don't mean to come off like salesy, but a lot of times just people need to reach out and find someone that has a lot of successful testimonials, maybe living true to their name. I'd say credentials take like a distant third place. I've met many PhDs that I would never hire, many MDs that I would never ask any health advice from. It's really just like what have they done for other people, and can they do this successfully? Do they have many, many testimonials? That's the big thing. And if they live true to the message too, that's a good supplement. You know what I mean? To enhancing their message. But in a sense, like, people need to reach out and just hire someone, because the human health, human mental and physical health, it's kind of like fairly complicated, especially when pathology already has formed. And a lot of people are like, oh, I can't even understand my car. I'm going to take my car to the mechanic when something's broken. But somehow I'm going to understand the complexity of the human mind and body and fix it myself. You know what I mean? Where they have no clue about what healthy eating is. I mean, I've had people that are clearly overweight, like do an Ozempic, and then try to tell me they know what even healthy eating is, what even living like a human being is, or stuff of that sort, you know? And it's so delusional, because people are in the US have normalized mental and physical pathology to such a massive extent. They're so, like, most of them are so completely lost down the wrong path, and they've been there for so long. They think it's like a normal way of life now, and somehow they have figured out some kind of sustainable system, you know? And so when you're at that stage, you need an aggressive and strong outside perspective to come in and saturate that mind virus that they have going on. And if that doesn't happen, they will never change. They will, I mean, it's so rare. Maybe 1 out of every 1,000 will, just by mere luck, just happen that the circumstances in the background happen to line up all correctly. But most will never do that, and they never will. And then they'll blame their genetics and whoever is in office right now for all their problems, you know, like something stupid like that.
It's so true too. Like, a lot of different therapies have their time and place. Ozempic can literally change lives. It can save the lives of diabetics. At the same time, for the average person who's using it, perhaps there's a reason and it makes sense. But a lot of times, like, it might be just a quick fix, an attempt to lose weight. And when you do that, you have to think, okay, do I know better than the body? Do I know why this weight is here? Because if I don't and I do this, then all of a sudden, what happens to the heavy metals and toxins that are sequestered away in the fat? Well, they must be mobilized into the bloodstream, which can then lodge into organs, into the brain, and cause like very serious complications. And if you stop using it, then the weight comes back, as we're seeing in some of the actual research around these things. But like, if you're not addressing the reason the body put on the weight in the first place, it's a quick fix that might have some serious long-term complications, versus if you go to the root of it and at least you understand why the weight is there, then perhaps even if you use the Ozempic or a different GLP-1, then it comes off and it doesn't come back because you actually address what's underlying the weight gain in the first place.
Yeah, the biggest issue, I mean, you know this, I'm talking more to your audience here. The biggest issue with the fat loss industry and just the healthcare industry in general, it's a symptom management industry. So fat loss, they symptom manage through diet and exercise. You know, this is just symptom management, again, 101. Yeah, it's a little better than Ozempic or fat loss drugs, right? Pharmaceutical drugs. But these are all not meeting the problem at the level of the problem for pretty much everyone. So the problem with weight gain or excessive weight gain, especially the more excessive, the bigger the problem is the problem is at the thinking and emotional dimension. And they're trying to solve it at a biological dimension. So managing symptoms only yields more symptoms over time. That's it. And okay, like you took Ozempic and you lost 30 pounds. Ooh, you could have easily done that by just changing your diet slightly and not even working out in 3 months, you know? But now you took something that could alter your digestive system for forever and possibly cause thyroid cancer. Good work, you know, good job. So, okay, you lost 30 pounds, awesome. But the belief system that led you to gain those 30 pounds is also going to be the same belief system that's going to lead to high blood pressure, you know, cancer formation. Because for sure, if you've gained 30 pounds of excess weight, your toxic load is huge. It's high. And all those toxins are swimming around your visceral tissue, deposited in your fat. The average newborn born in a metropolitan area in America is born with 233 trace amounts of 233 different chemicals in their bloodstream already. And okay, so cool. You lost 30 pounds, but you didn't change the belief system that led you to gain that 30 pounds. And now 10 years later, you have pancreatic cancer. All right, cool. So now you got to deal with that, and that's pretty much fatal, in the late stages. Okay, now you're like on 5 other different drugs, plus you need surgery. This is how it goes. And people will do absolutely everything imaginable, but change the person that's causing the disease. And you don't have to look too far, man. You can look right in the mirror and you can know the source of pretty much all of your problems in one way or another, if you're honest about it. And most people don't want to be honest about it. And that's why that's why they've normalized a life of obesity, misery, and disease. I mean, how many men do you see with boobs, with boobs and a big belly and bad skin? And it's totally normal. They're like, this is normal. I'm like, dude, this is not normal at all. This is what like a mind virus is, because a mind virus, that's the biggest virus around. Has killed more people and caused more misery worldwide than anything else. Is a belief system that doesn't facilitate health conscious thinking, and yeah, I mean, it's sad because, you see it all the time. In a way, it's like, that is what keeps us in business. But in a way too, it's kind of just sad to see because, the answers are fairly straightforward. Like an 11-year-old child can kind of understand when they're already thinking like a normal person. But when mental illness is the norm and people think it's normal to go work like 50, 60 hours a week and be in debt and argue with your spouse every other day and, be selfless to an extreme, because being too selfless causes a lot of, you to put yourself second too many times. And then, you gain weight, etc., but then grow disgruntled towards the people you're helping because you never get your needs met and stuff of that sort. And then they're like, oh, I have high blood pressure and depression because it's genetics. I'm like, dude, no, you just have a low IQ because it's genetics, okay? And that's leading to your poor decision making.
So when people have these mind viruses and or negative automatic thoughts, how do you help them with that? Because as you mentioned, it's one of the lead dominoes. You fix that, then everything falls into place. We all know the core tenets of what we should be eating, the fact that we should be moving, we should be exposed to light, these basic things. But then the disconnect is between knowing that and actually implementing it.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of ways you can go about this. And I've presented, this is just the model I use. It's not for everybody, but it's a model that people can kind of investigate further and see if it's right for them with professional help, So it'll be easier kind of like with a chart, but it's okay. I mean, it's very simple. You have, let's say, fat gain. I mean, that's very common these days. Pretty much everyone is overweight now. So it's important to see fat gain as like a symptom, and then the bigger question is like, oh, what is it a symptom of? And a lot of times people will go like, oh, it's a symptom of poor lifestyle and nutritional choices. That's why a lot of times when people are overweight, a lot of their family and friends just go like, eat less or go work out more. And that's basically the same as telling like an alcoholic just to stop drinking, It's like, obviously I need to stop drinking, but there's something deeper going on that's leading me to want to drink. So you got to go a step deeper and go like, oh, there's a belief system or like a mind virus that's causing people to find it acceptable to do this level of self-abuse. Because that's what it is. You're just abusing yourself and you're not showing yourself any respect. And then you go a little bit deeper, and that kind of mind virus is leading to poor lifestyle patterns, poor nutrition, which is again leading to the excess weight gain and depression and high blood pressure, whatever. You can name anything at the top. And then you go, okay, so what's leading to this mind virus? And there are a few things, to consider here, but here are the common ones. One, the person most always has some kind of love-hate relationship in their life. So A typical one is like you've been together with someone for 10 years, and maybe initially you actually did love them at one point, but then you kind of faded apart for one reason or another. But you continue to stay in the relationship, and in a sense, what this does is kind of set up a pattern of not, again, being honest with yourself, because now you're putting on a facade that, yes, I love this person, but really deep down you don't, and want to leave, et cetera, et cetera. And this lack of kind of safety, it makes people want to seek food, because in this conversation, it makes people want to seek food because food, what does it do? It loves you unconditionally. It gives you pleasure. And most importantly, it gives you what this type of subcategory of people lack is control in the external world, because they feel they can't leave that relationship for one reason or another. So, but with food, you can pick it up, eat it whenever you want it, and put it away whenever you want it. It gives you pleasure, and then you can put it away. So it gives you that sense of power, et cetera, et cetera. Another very common one is the story gap that we mentioned earlier. This is super common. And this is like, the person wants to be like an artist, but they, for some reason or another, think they can't succeed. And then they go and get, they work as a lawyer, let's just say, And maybe for like a year or two, it is very exciting because, they get the social prestige, I'm a lawyer, and they get maybe a more consistent pay, although it's a hard occupation to make a living in too. I'm not putting down lawyers. It's actually a very difficult occupation, et cetera, et cetera. But then, 2 or 3 years later, in the back of their head, they know they just want to be painting in art class or teaching art or whatever. And then when that case comes in and, the paralegal doesn't do their work, now you got to do more of the work you don't want to do. Then you get angry at the paralegal. And you know what I mean? And it builds up this chronic tension that leads to a lot of micro stressors, that leads to the deterioration of the central nervous system, and then leads to maladaptive behavior. So this person thinks they have no power, in that particular situation. So they go seek out food. It gives them that pleasure. And most importantly, too, it accepts them for who they are. It doesn't ask any questions. They're like, I just love you for who you are. Here's pleasure, And then that leads to poor lifestyle and nutritional choices, which leads to excess weight gain, And there are a couple of other variables, but for the sake of this podcast, I know we're kind of, it's not a Joe Rogan 5 hour podcast here. It goes down to, then we got to go a step lower. Like what is causing people to get into relationships they don't want to be in, to get into jobs they don't want to be in? And there's a lot of things, but it comes down to a misalignment or lack of clarity in core values. And core values you can look at as like your DNA, like what's important to you personally. So like for me, like autonomy is important in my work, having enough time to read at least like 2 books a month is important in my schedule. Having even little things like a slow morning is so important. I hate getting up and rushing out of bed. I like that slow morning. And everyone is different here. You can't look over your shoulder and see, oh, it's working for Eugene. That means it must work for me. Unfortunately, it's not that easy, and if you do that, you're going to get more lost because you get, in a sense, nature is a novelty generator, as Paul Chek would say oftentimes. And everyone is different, even each leaf on a bush is different on the same bush. You know what I mean? So you got to be intuitive. And the one issue these days is people in such a heightened myopic stress response. It's hard to sit down and listen to that intuition. And then on top of that, they drown themselves with all sorts of medical drugs. But, when you feel pain, it's your body's way of telling you something's wrong and something needs to change. But instead of changing, people just down more medical drugs like antidepressants. Like when you have depression, anxiety, that's your body's way of telling you like, hey, you need to sit down and reevaluate certain things because something is really deeply wrong at a foundational level right now, But they're like, no, not going to do that. Like, here's a half a bottle of antidepressants, and stuff of that sort.
Or even just here's some food, because food can do the same thing. I mean, what's one of the interesting things about food and simple carbohydrates, sugars, is that is the most powerful way of blunting cortisol and stress hormones. And so it's like I feel stressed, I go binge eat junk because it is a way of intuitively regulating my nervous system back towards balance. It's not the best, most effective consequence-free route, but it makes sense ultimately. And so much of this ties back to nervous system readiness, CNS health, and noticing how these symptoms, like where they come from, and instead of viewing them as the problem, it's a fuel gauge showing an issue, and not necessarily a lack of fuel or too much fuel, but an indication that there's something here. And so it's like when these symptoms arise, pausing for a second and getting curious about what is this? Why is it going on? What are the potential linked factors? And that's where something like a journal can be really helpful to correlate. Okay, I do this 3 days in a row. On the fourth day, every single time, I get a really big headache. Okay, perhaps I should try doing it every day, every other day instead. Okay, now the headache doesn't occur, but maybe I shouldn't even be doing it at all. A lot of different ways of going about this.
Yeah, and my honest question for people that have been following like standard healthcare practices in the US, which are basically symptom management healthcare practices, is like, okay, like you've been on antidepressants for 15 years. Why are you still depressed? You know, you got to ask these honest questions and stop duping yourself. You know what I mean? Because I've seen people on like these antidepressants or any kind of medical drugs for like 5, 10, 15, 20 years, dude. And they look worse and feel worse than ever before. And I'm like, come on, man, when are you going to wake up and start asking honest questions? And a lot of times people don't do it because they know they would have to change who they are at the core, you know, to make these problems disappear. And that could be quite scary. You know what I mean? And Robert Kawasaki would say all the time, people are, they use excuses to avoid the stress of needing to make change. So like, I don't have time. Well, everyone has time. You know, I've had executives that work 60 hours and have like 5 kids, and they still are jacked even more so than I am all year round and do Ironmans. So all these things like, I don't have time, this, that, it shuts the mind down from creating a solution, which provides short-term relief, because sometimes the solution is difficult. You know what I mean? It could be stressful, but it shuts the mind down from creating a solution. And it provides that short-term relief that people love, but long-term is detrimental because people actually really do need that change. You know what I mean? But they're just kind of creating these excuses to form a dissociation. My best one is like, I don't have money for organic food. I'm like, okay, that's easy to disprove because the average American spends $8,000 to $16,000 a year on non-essential expenses without even thinking twice about it. And most of these expenses just lead to their obesity, poor skin, poor appearance, dependence on antidepressants or whatever. And then when I tell them like, oh, it takes about like 6,000 a year for a 2,000 calorie a day or all organic diet every single day of the year, like, I don't have money for that. I'm like, dude, we just concluded you spend 8,000 to 16,000 a year. And then they're like, just kind of like phase away, you know, into oblivion, or just admit that that is true and then don't change anyways, which tells you that mental and physical pathology has been normalized to a large extent, many standard deviations in the wrong direction in our country.
The example I like to use there is that if you look at the cost of a Snickers, it's like what, say $2.50 for a 3-ounce candy bar. If you were to multiply that so that you have the cost of a pound worth of Snickers, it's going to be astronomically higher than even grass-fed ground beef. Like you can get grass-fed ground beef for a lot cheaper than you can for the equivalent amount of Snickers and other things that seem cheap, but when you actually do like the full cost accounting are a lot more expensive.
Nick, this is all super easy information for people to understand that aren't mentally ill, you know? But when they are, it's going to be, they're just going to almost go blank when you're talking to them and just start dissociating. They're not even there anymore at the conscious level, you know? They're somewhere else. Because God forbid they start getting real answers that really just point back to they need to change the person who they are, you know? And that is extremely scary for most people. So that's the real issue. Look, the number one reason for bankruptcy in the US, which accounts for 85% of personal bankruptcies, is just health issues. And 9 out of 10 Americans right now are metabolically sick, and the average American has less than $1,000 in their bank account. So what does that mean in the near future as an economic disaster for our country, which is already spending $300 billion a year on helping obese people with their health problems?
What's interesting about this too is you can take it from both perspectives. You can go either route. You can either pause and you can get very clear on your goals, your personal mission, and reverse engineer it that way. And that's a great strategy if you're already healthy. But if you're not healthy, you don't have the biological energy to do that. So it's going to be just too difficult for a lot of people. And I think that's where we can segue on to the world of shopping properly, because once you start getting the right fuels in your body, it might take a little bit of getting used to, but then you start getting a energetic surplus. And with an energetic surplus, your brain works better, your muscles work better, your thinking is clearer, it's crisper, everything just improves. And from there, you can actually get very clear on how would I go about implementing these changes. So you wrote the Anti-Factory Farm Shopping Guide, and let's dive into some of those findings, because I know that can seem like it's below the surface. It's like, or it's above the surface. It's not as important to cover as some of these other things, but it's also a great entry point for a lot of people who are aware that they need to make changes and don't really know how.
Yeah. And it's important to, everyone is different. So you got to meet the problem at the level of the problem, So changing your diet is one of the easiest things you can change, because you got to eat food anyways every day. Might as well be the right food. And trust me, you could eat, having just a whole food diet, even if it's not organic, is fine. In most cases, it's a great step in the right direction. And it's so inexpensive compared to eating out. Your typical meal when you eat out is going to be about 300% more expensive than that equivalent meal for when you cook it at home. And if you get the system set up, and I can cover what those systems are, it takes like 5 minutes for me to cook 3,000 calories a day, and most people aren't even, well, they are eating 3,000 calories a day, but via processed food or fast food. But most people aren't going to eat 3,000 calories via like steak and vegetables. You know what I mean? That's going to be a gargantuous amount of food for most people.
I want to know that system too, personally. How do you set it up so that you only spend 5 minutes a day cooking for 3,000 calories or so?
It's so easy. Basically, like I get up in the morning, I go work out first thing in the morning all the time. I find this to be way more facilitative of consistency, versus working out midday or at night. And I get home, I have a tray. I put parchment paper on top of that. I put like 1.5 pounds of meat or 2 pounds of meat on there, a bunch of non-starchy vegetables, and I throw some rice in the rice cooker. While it's cooking, I'm in the shower.
Does that go in the oven?
In the oven, yeah.
Gotcha.
Actually, I have like a toaster oven too, but I do use it in the oven from time to time, like a countertop toaster oven, and I just leave it in there. And while it's cooking, I'm taking a shower and getting ready for the day. By the time I'm done with the shower, I have 2, not 3, but 2 glass Tupperware containers. So I fill both of them up. I eat one of them right away. Then I fill the other one I have up again. So I have to wash even less. This system is also great because you don't have to be in the kitchen while it's cooking. Okay. And there's no cleanup, because all you do is throw away the parchment paper on the pan. And that's it. You know what I mean? And quickly rinse off the inner pot lid or can or whatever they're called in the rice cooker, and you're done. And that's it. I mean, dude, it takes like 5 minutes. At that point, if like a person's not doing it, there are deeper issues for why they don't want to do this. You know what I mean? Like much deeper issues, which again goes into the level of like, you got to meet the problem at the level of the problem. And where that problem is for most people, it's at multiple levels. It's at almost every level now. But it's important to identify that, because if you're not, you're just managing symptoms. You know what I mean? And managing symptoms only yields more symptoms over time. That's why, Nick,
do you have to flip that meat? Like once you're cooking it, do you flip the meat into the veggies? You just let it go?
Nope. No, you just cook it in there and it cooks thoroughly all the time.
Nice.
The meats I stick to are elk, deer. I get them from forceofnaturemeats.com. I also do hunt in Texas as well. Luckily, I met a friend that has quite a bit of acreage, so he lets me use his land for hunting, so it's quite easy for me. But I eat elk, deer, wild boar, grass-fed and grass-finished beef, grass-fed and grass-finished bison, and wild fish. And then I also eat organic vegetables and fruit. And I do like eating steel cut oats too. I just really like how they taste. And I have like a half a cup. It's not even that much, pretty much every morning. But that's it. And I pretty much eat that like literally all year round. Okay. I have like perfect metabolic health markers, triglyceride levels, HDL, body fat is low, muscle to fat ratio is great. I'm already 40 years old, but my testosterone total test still varies from 900 to 1100 nanograms per deciliter. Just doing this basic, that's where people are like, oh yeah, I get it. I know you get it, but are you doing it? That's the question. And my answer is no, you're not. If you're honest about it, if they were, we wouldn't have 9 out of 10 Americans being metabolically sick right now, And the measurements they're using for metabolic health are like, is your heart rate working? Yeah, is your heart working? Okay, you are? Okay, now you're metabolic. It's not even like Olympic level requirements, and people still can't meet that.
Yeah, and it's actually, I think it's higher than just 9 out of 10. It's like 95% or something.
Yeah, I tried to show up to this podcast today being optimistic, so I said 90%. But yeah, I mean, if the standards, the study I'm quoting, I forgot the exact PubMed number, but it's easy to find. People can just look up like metabolic health study or whatever, 90% of population sick.
And it's getting worse over time too. It's not getting better.
I think what's happening is the people that are health conscious, they have more resources and more wealth of information, become even more health conscious. But that's like 1 out of every like 100. And they're even in greater states of being now. But then the rest of the 99 they're completely lost, man. I think it's important to start talking about this, although it sounds a little bit negative. But if we don't acknowledge that there's a problem, that it's a serious problem, it's just going to keep continuing. And it's not normal for people to be on all these medical drugs and look so terrible and be so overweight. Totally not normal. And I think it's because we're kind of sugarcoating around the conversation, like, oh yeah, you need to like lose a little bit of weight, or, oh yeah, it's okay. Like you're taking these antidepressants, but at least you're on 1 and that guy's on like 5, stuff like this. And we need to just be honest, like, hey man, like this isn't normal and this isn't benefiting you. If they worked, look, Americans are the most medically drugged out humans in all of human history, but yet still remain the sickest humans in literally all of human history, all 28 plus human species that have come and gone. What kind of success rate is that? You know what I mean? Like, come on. Like, would you go to the same practitioner that you've been paying for over and over again, and you still remain sick for 20 years? I mean, it's good for the practitioner. I guess you're on their 401k plan or their BMW fund or whatever.
Eugene, make this practical for us. So if you're walking into the grocery store, what are some of the common pitfalls that people accidentally fall into? And then also, what are like any key tips you have to get the most out of your grocer visit? Because not all of our friends have farms or huge plots of land where we can go and do our own hunting.
Yeah, and they don't have to. The good step is just to start with eating all whole food, zero processing. So just eat beef, chicken, fish, even if it's farm raised fish, whatever. As long as it's whole food, it's a good step in the right direction. Just start eating vegetables and fruit only. And for food or for liquid intake, just do like water, teas, and coffee. And then if you want to take it a step above, then do all organic versions of all those foods. And then if you want to take it a step above that, you could do like, make sure your meats are fed a species-specific diet. So for cattle, they're herbivores, they need to eat grass and other forage. So you want them to be ideally grass-fed and grass-finished, so you got to be careful with the labels there, because a lot of times it does say grass-fed, but all cattle are grass-fed. So it's a little tricky. You know what I mean? All cattle are grass-fed for like 90, 85% of their life, but then they're sent to a feedlot on what's referred to as kind of like a finishing phase. And they're fed heavy amounts of usually genetically modified corn and soy as the base mixture in that feed. And that's not a species-specific diet. So when you don't feed an animal a species-specific diet, the nutritional composition of that animal changes. And there are a few things that change in that nutritional composition. They typically develop a lot more fat, you know? So a good way to check if your beef is 100% like legitimate grass-fed beef is typically it's like burgundy red. It's never bright red. And the fat is yellow. It's not white. And it's also, if you poke the fat, it's very spongy. If it's very hard, that's not real grass-fed beef, grass-fed and grass-finished beef. And you can go to Costco and you can press on the fat there on a lot of their steaks, and you can see it's very hard. It's like candle wax, or it's like solidified candle wax, you know, and it's very white, but the fat should be yellow in tone, you know? So, so you want to make sure it says grass-fed and grass-finished, but there's another layer of complexity. So, because there is no oversight on the grass-fed claims, like I could be a rancher and feed, you know, the cattle grass for 80% of their life, then transition them to grains for like a month or two, then finish them on grass for like a week. And it's still technically grass-fed and grass-finished, you know what I mean? So some sites they can check out are like americangrassfed.org. That's like the gold standard in the US of grass-fed on-site inspected ranches, you know, that do on-site inspection. And they inspect once every 15 months. And they do it for the 15-month interval because it helps them inspect the ranch every season that way. Because some ranches could do fully grass-fed during certain seasons, but not other seasons. You know what I mean? So there's another layer of complexity there. And it's important to understand, too, that 90% of the beef sold in the U.S. doesn't come from the U.S. You know, it comes from like Latin American, like JBS, or Australia. I think Australia is okay. It's a good company to get beef from, or a good
New Zealand would be
country.
good, too.
New Zealand as well, because grain isn't subsidized there. So it's actually not profitable to do grain finished cattle operations. It becomes quite expensive. And in fact, if you take the subsidies out of the US food model, all factory farms become unprofitable. You know what I mean? The only thing holding them afloat is the taxpayer subsidy. So a lot of times when people go to the grocery store and they see like, oh, grass-fed, grass-finished ground beef, one packet, it's like $9. But then the normal factory farmed one, it's like $6 or something. So it's a $3 difference. But really, you're still paying for that. It's just you're paying for it up front with your taxes, you know? And that's it. And on top of that, I mean, dude, people have enough money for that difference. Like I said, they're spending $8,000 to $16,000 a year on non-essential expenses. You know, $5 a day on Starbucks coffee, which is doused in like all sorts of xenoestrogen and microplastics, and then like the myriad of biocides used to grow those beans, etc. And then that are even magnified with the heat of the processing of the coffee bean, etc., etc. So, so yeah, some things to consider. But I mean, I just gave them some easy websites to bypass all of that and get all their answers. I think Force of Nature Meats. I think forceofnature.com or forceofnaturemeats.com.
Yeah, I'll put it in the show notes. Either way, that's the lowdown on beef. But then what about other animal products? There's obviously chicken, that's a big one. And then there's pork. And then there's also the other animal products like eggs and dairy. How about any quick tips you have there?
Yeah, so chicken and pork at the grocery store level, again, this is really getting the apex of the apex, okay? It's not necessarily to go to this level, but if you want to go to it, you're not going to be able to find it at the grocery store level, unfortunately. Whole Foods and Natural Grocers does sell whole pasture-raised chicken, you know, but they don't sell it in pieces. You can find a company called primalpastures.com. It's a Southern California-based company, and they sell quality pasture-raised chicken, okay? There's also one called happy-hens.com. And I actually worked there to learn about regenerative egg-laying operations for my second book. They gave me a chance to work with them for a bit and learn about their systems. And that's a good resource to check out, okay? But at the grocery store level, the best you're going to get is like free-range pork and chicken. And what that means is basically they're still in a huge warehouse, but they have like a little kind of patio, like a smoke pit, typically where they can go roam outside for X amount of hours. Whether they do or not is a long conversation. Most of the time, no, especially with the broiler chicken or egg-laying chicken operations, because the window is quite small and the light is quite bright, so it kind of scares a lot of the chickens. They kind of stay inside most of the time. So really, it's just kind of like a caged operation for the most part. But also, you'll see in a lot of the packaging it says vegetarian fed.
Yes, and
for
eggs
chickens,
too. Eggs say that as well.
Yeah, and it sounds fancy, but chickens are, remember, if you want the optimum nutrition, you need a species-specific diet, and chicken are omnivores. They prefer like bugs and insects and all that stuff first before they get like anything else, you know? And when it says vegetarian fed, it really just means it's like grain fed. And when you feed them large amounts of grain, because you get high amounts of that omega-6 in the shell of the grain, it spikes up the omega-6 quite a bit in relation to the omega-3. And omega-6 is kind of like a pro-inflammatory. This is just for your audience. I know you know this stuff. Omega-6 is kind of just a pro-inflammatory micronutrient, and omega-3 is like anti-inflammatory. And they can look up the inflammation theory of disease and see that all disease originates just from chronic inflammation in the body, which comes from diet and other sources like chronic stress, injuries, infections, et cetera, et cetera.
It's also one of the reasons that seed oils have been vilified and they have their own issues. Of course, there's other things, toxicities and the byproducts of the processing and those. But part of it is because of the really high omega-6 and specifically linoleic acid content. Yeah.
Yeah. And in those seed oils, it's highly concentrated, you know? And it's also, whenever you get anything in a liquid form, it's easy to overconsume. You know what I mean? So that's the issue with the oils. None of these, like omega-6, 3, and 9, none of them are bad if they're in the right ratio. But when you start getting them from like farmed products or like industrially manufactured products, the ratio is most always like super off, you know? So the typical American has like in a ratio of like omega-3 to omega-6, like 1 omega-3 to like 20 or 30 omega-6 in their diet, where in reality, what you want is usually like a 1-to-1, you know, somewhere around there. And you could easily achieve that by just eating pasture-raised meats, wild fish, organic, not even organic, just whole vegetables and fruit, and drinking water. And that's it. It would just naturally, just for the most part, happen on average, on a weekly average, that ratio would just turn out. So
Eugene, if I'm looking for chicken, pasture-raised is great, free range, not as good. If I see vegetarian diet, that's something I should avoid. But if it doesn't say anything about diet, is that going to be a cleaner omnivorous diet, or is that going to be perhaps even worse?
Yeah, usually on every carton, except like the real cheap eggs where it has like no logo, nothing. Where it says
so this
Kroger's.
is for like normal chicken still. Before we can get to the eggs.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I haven't had any chicken where it didn't have something written on there. The most common one is like a vegetarian diet, you know? If it says, the thing is with pasture-raised operations is a lot of them too don't use organic grains. They use non-GMO grains, you know? So that's something to consider too. Because inevitably there's going to be a decent amount of spraying going on in corn and soy operations because it's a monocrop operation. It's the only way to be able to sustain it when you don't have any biodiversity in your crop. And the thing to consider is there are no safety studies done on these pesticides. You know, a lot of people think there are, but complete formulations of these biocides, we'll just call them biocides, are never tested for safety. So for the average listener, they probably think like they take the complete formulation, the thing you see at Home Depot, like Roundup, and spray it on something and then test it for safety. That's actually not how it happens. They just test the active ingredient, which is one ingredient among a myriad of ingredients. It could be less than 1% of the total formulation in isolation on its own. And if it's safe at that level, then they deem the whole entire formulation as safe. But the problem is the inert ingredients, which they take out of the testing, are put into the formulation to enhance the potency and lethality of the active ingredient. So obviously, when you take those out, it could pass safety testing, like glyphosate in Roundup. That's very popular. So if you just spray glyphosate, which is just an active ingredient in isolation on its own, it's useless. It almost does nothing. It almost does nothing. But if you spray it in the complete formulation of a Roundup product, which usually glyphosate is around 40 to 50% of the formulation, and then the other, 60 to 50% of the formulation is what's referred to as inactive or inert ingredients, it becomes hundreds of times more toxic. You know what I mean? But that's what they're using in the field. They're not using the active ingredient in isolation on its own. So a lot of misinformed data influencers, or whatever you call them, like Dr. Eads, or I call her Glyphosate Babe, where it's really food science babe, but she's always promoting the safety of glyphosate.
What's interesting too, there's so many issues with it that are not often discussed. First of all, glyphosate was patented as an antibiotic, and if it's patented for a use like that, there's probably efficacy behind it. But then also it was deemed safe because of the impact it has on human cells. Yet we're not just human cells, we also have microbiomes. And the way it works disrupts the shikimate pathway in the microbiome and decimates the gut microbiome composition. And then you also have issues with the molecule of glyphosate being molecularly very similar to glycine itself. It can displace glycine, which is a really important amino acid, non-essential amino acid. There's so many reasons to avoid it. We could probably record an entire other podcast just on that one biocide. There's a bunch of other ones. That's the big one. But then also, since we have limited time, when you're looking at chicken, I'm gonna go back to this one again. If you see air chilled, I see that sometimes, and I have no idea why I want the chicken to be air chilled, but it's always more expensive. What is that?
Oh yeah, so that's pretty easy. So typically when they slaughter the animal to cool it down and to clean it off, they dip it in a chlorinated bath. And it's kind of like a conveyor belt that goes into a pool with a bunch of chlorine. And then there's just like a bunch of chickens, like thousands of chickens go through this pool. But then you get a lot of guts and pus and intestines in this. And some people don't like that, you know what I mean? So then they have another system called air chilling. So it's another conveyor belt, but it goes through kind of like let's say like a sector of the processing plant where they just blow a lot of really cold air on the chicken. So it bypasses this kind of dirty chlorinated pool. And it's a bit more sanitary, and you don't get that kind of like pink pus buildup sometimes in the, container, you know what I'm talking about? So you typically get those from those kind of chlorinated kind of pool. That's basically all it is. So that's what air chilling is. It's just a more, in some ways, a more sanitary way of just processing the chicken and cooling it down.
Sure. When you consume chicken, do you often wash it off before cooking?
So I rarely eat chicken these days, to be honest. But when I do, I don't wash it off. I don't know if that's the best thing to do or not, but I usually kind of cook it thoroughly. I think if anything, it'll probably kill everything at that point. But I usually, honestly, my meat sources are like elk, deer, wild boar, grass-fed, grass-finished beef. I just feel so much better when I eat those. My skin looks better. I'm fuller for way more in the day. My strength and endurance also increases in the gym quite a bit, and stuff of that sort. So,
what are your thoughts on the importance of going organic or grass-fed? I mean, I guess grass-fed, grass-finished speaks for itself, but organic specifically when it comes to fatty meats and just fat sources in general?
I always eat organic because, again, there have been no safety studies on complete formulations on any of these biocides. And organic also means no antibiotics, no steroids, no beta agonists, no GMOs, et cetera. It doesn't just stop at the biocide level. And a lot of people like, Glyphosate Babe, they say organic uses pesticides too. And first of all, okay, let's cover that. Because yes, they might as a last resort, but their pesticides are like salt and water, or vinegar and water, or soap and water, or copper.
Copper, yeah, I've seen that one.
I'm pretty sure I would have, if I sprayed, let's just be common sense here, not retarded. And if I had 2 apples, and on one apple I sprayed Roundup on it, and on one apple I sprayed vinegar and water on it, which apple would you eat? Let's not be stupid here with these freaking stupid data influencers that never left their laboratory or their computer screen and forgot their common sense, like probably never even had it to begin with.
Yes, I agree. I think organic in general is very important. I think it's especially important for foods that are higher in fat, or whenever you're eating, if you're like peeling something, the actual food inside the peel is going to be less saturated. It's still going to have plenty of the biocides on them, but less if you're eating something that's fat, because fat sequesters toxins and lipophilic chemicals, like a lot of these biocides. Those are going to be more important to have organic too than something that's on the EWG's list of, let's say, the clean 15 foods lowest in biocides.
Yeah, I don't like that list, man. I just think look, you're spending money already, $8,000 to $16,000 on shit. Just convert that shit into actual conscious spending that is going to benefit you. And also in the grand scheme of things, it's like, look, where you're putting your money into like a system that's unsustainable. The earth, you're looking at, 70% of it can't even be farmed for anything because it's the ocean. And then the remaining half of that can't be farmed because of some kind of climate issue or just the land is too tilted or whatever. So basically you're left with like 15% of the earth's surface volume that's able to be farmed for food. And half of that is where metropolitan areas are built. They're built in the most fertile of lands. So you're left really with like 8%, let's just say, or 7.5%. And most of that is just through monocropping, which is supported by which relies heavily on chemical agriculture, because you can't run a huge monocrop operation without chemical agriculture. And that's what you're supporting, you know what I mean? And it's not doing you any justice, and it's not helping anyone around. It's maybe quote unquote on the surface saving you like $2 or $3, but you're spending that money already on other shit that's not adding any value to your life whatsoever. Like, okay, dude, who cares? You got a new iPhone, big deal. You're still obese.
Before we wrap this one up, I think we'll have to do another one to talk more about grocery shopping, because there's a lot to unpack here, and we've only touched on animal products so far. Then we go into eggs. We've mentioned eggs a little bit. It's confusing. There's cage-free, there's free range, there's pasture-raised, there's all kinds of different quality things, lots of marketing claims on egg cartons. Let's quickly break down those, and then also go on to dairy, and specifically like milk and yogurts, and what you look for when choosing high quality sources of dairy.
Yeah, so with eggs, to make it simple, if they want a good example, just go to happy-hens.com and just see what they're doing, and then whatever company you want to buy, just evaluate it to their standards. That's going to be the apex of commercial brands, okay? You're not going to find, at a commercial level, you're not going to find grain-free eggs. It's just not going to happen. You could do it yourself, though. It is possible to do it for yourself personally. And that's going to be the most nutrient-dense food, egg available, But that Happy-Hens, they're corn and soy-free operation. They're USDA organic certified. They rotate their hens onto new pasture every single day. And each hen has about like 200, last time I checked, 270 square foot of space per hen.
Oh, okay.
Where the industry average is 1.2 feet.
Yes.
So you go from 1.2 feet to 270. That's a huge difference. And the more space they have, that means the less crowding there is. That means the more access each individual hen has to a bunch of bugs and insects. Because if you have like a whole bunch of them, they're going to eat that up quick. And then again, you're just a grain operation again. You know what I mean? Because you need to supplement more heavily.
Have you heard of Ashley Armstrong? She's one of the ones, I think, doing things right when it comes to eggs and now making them commercially available, but she feeds her hens a real diet, and they also are tested to be low in linoleic acid, which you can't get if you're feeding them corn and soy and everything. So I'll put a link to that in the description, because I think that's another good source. And with the cost of eggs these days, it's not even much more expensive than some of the other ones you find in the grocery store.
Yeah, no, that'll be great. I'll check her out. Maybe even have her on my podcast. It's always good to kind of interview people like that. So.
Yeah. Okay, that's the egg. Oh, then also on the eggs, a lot of them say 108, like the high quality eggs say 108 square feet. Why 108? That seems very arbitrary. And does that matter?
Oh, that's, I think, like a certification they got from France. That's like a standard 108 square feet. It's like 10 by 10 basically, or whatever. again, that's just the industry standard is like 1.2, so that's a huge upgrade from that. But then that company I mentioned, happy-hens.com, is like 270.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? So it's quite a bit more. So
Vital Farms is one of like the common brands for like cleaner commercial eggs. They also have a product that's pasture-raised, and they have an organic version and a non-organic version. How does that work?
Well, that's exactly how it works. They have an organic and non-organic version. So they're all pasture-raised, just some of them are fed non-organic grains, so non-GMO, but non-organic. And some of them are fed organic grains. So organic also means non-genetically modified by default too. So their organic brand is kind of more of that orange kind of box with a lot of kind of cool graphics. They have like cool graphics on there and stuff. So yeah, I mean, you just got to be conscious of when you buy it. If it has a big thing that says organic or that stamp that says USDA organic, that's the one you would want to go for, because all of them are kind of pasture raised at the end of the day.
Yeah. Okay. How important is this test? I don't even know if it's valid, but cracking two types of eggs side by side and looking at how yellow or orange the egg yolk is to determine the nutrient density of it.
It's not that reliable of a system, actually, although you see that online quite a bit, because you could actually have legitimate, fully pasture-raised birds, but they're quite young. And they'll still be like very kind of see-through yellow yolk, not that deep, I don't know exactly, almost chrome, I guess. I don't know what color that is, but that deep kind of orange yolk, it's not going to have that, but it's still legitimate pasture-raised hens, but they just happen to be younger too. So there are a lot of variables to consider.
Bummer. I thought that was a very easy heuristic. I guess not. Eugene, we still have a lot more to cover. Have to be another day. If people want to check out your work, to read your book, to check out some of your testimonials, where do you want to direct them?
Yeah, they can go to trufkinathletics.com. And I guess next podcast, I actually did some research on AA amyloid buildup in organ supplements with Jason Roundtree at Michigan State University. So that would be a good topic to talk about as well. But yeah, they can find me on there. I'm on all the Facebooks and all that stuff, although I don't like being on that stuff, but I'm on there, keep the online business going.
Yep. Awesome. Been a pleasure hosting you, and I look forward to our next conversation. Okay.
All right, Nick. Thank you, man. Good to see you again.
I hope that this has been helpful for you. If you enjoyed it, subscribe and hit the thumbs up. I love knowing who's in the 1% committed to reaching their full potential. Comment 1% below so that I know who you are. For all the resources and links, meet me on my website at mindbodypeak.com. I appreciate you and look forward to connecting with you. As a reminder, the information depicted in this video is for information purposes only. Please consult your primary healthcare professional before making any lifestyle changes.